Hi guys, I'm glad I can be here. I would say earlier this year it really didn't look like that, but that's the surprise of doing a startup. And so I'm going to talk to all of you about Mendeley from start to exit and what I learned along the way. And it's obviously my view of Mendeley. There are a few examples that might be useful for you. Some of them might not be applicable to your specific case, but I'm going to tell you our story. And I start. How do I get to the next one? Great. I'm going to talk firstly about the product and the growth that we've experienced and some of the factors that were crucial to get there. So in terms of product, we started this thing without any previous experience in having done businesses. So we were really unexperienced academics, PhD students, and this is one of us, and we had lots of academic papers that needed organization. And so we developed a software that would run on different platforms, Mac, Windows, Linux, a mobile app, a web app. And you could drag and drop those PDF papers, basically the academic papers, the published papers by scientists, and have Mendeley extract the data from those PDF documents and set up a list of references, including relevant metadata about those documents automatically on your desktop. So basically, as a researcher, you very quickly have thousands, if not tens of thousands of these PDF documents, and Mendeley would help you to make sense of that. In addition to that, we would allow people then, or researchers then, to be productive with that information, right? So you would be able to read those papers in a PDF viewer, you would be able to make highlights and annotations, and then more importantly, because research is an inherently social activity, we would have groups where you could share papers, where you could collectively annotate and work together on new publications and really make productive use of the software. So essentially it's a productivity and collaboration tool that we developed that would address a huge problem in the academic space. However, then the trick that we did, and I think that got us to the next level, is based on a concept that Last.fm had shown historically. We would aggregate everything that would happen on the platform in the cloud. So similar to Last.fm showing kind of the top artists, the top songs, we would display that information very prominently based on academic information. So let's say, what is the most discussed article in bioscience? What is the hottest topic in the US in physics right now, and so forth. So by connecting these millions of individual libraries that people have set up by themselves, connecting that centrally via a central server, we could discover a lot of stuff that was going on in academia. This is a screenshot of how the tool would look like. You have kind of collections and groups, and you have a list of references with the PDFs attached. And here's another screenshot of how the PDF viewer would look like. And if you put that PDF in a shared group, then the highlights and annotations would get different colors based on the different collaborators. And that is a screenshot that would kind of show as an example of how this aggregated information really adds value, where you can see for the topic biological science, you'd be able to see what are, in this case, the most popular groups, what are the popular papers, who are the active members, what are popular tags that are being applied to that discipline. And so it's driving a huge social discovery engine that we've built. How do we grow that? So we just recently, I think just yesterday or the day before, we hit 2.5 million users, and the 15 largest user bases are pretty impressive. And we achieved that basically, we are 3 German guys, but we achieved that by moving to London and focusing on the US and the UK market very specifically. What we also did is we leveraged user love that we received because we were solving this important problem for so many people, that people said, well, I love your product, how can I tell my friends, my colleagues, how can I give a presentation at my institution? So what we set up is we set up a kind of, we called it Mendeley Advisor Program, where we would have those people apply to Mendeley to become an official Mendeley advisor. And if you're not too familiar with academia, then let me tell you one thing. Academia is very ego-driven, right? I'm the specialist, I'm an expert in something, I want to put something on my CV. And so this was really, really driving a community of 1,500 highly active users on the ground that would drive a kind of grassroots marketing approach. And because of this automated crowdsourcing, I would say, we were able to leverage these individual millions of libraries and aggregate information about, right now, we're roughly 450 million academic documents, of which we are roughly at 80 million unique documents at the moment. And then we make that information available through an API for other people to access. So we have information about the documents, about the user profiles, all on an anonymous basis, obviously, about the user-generated tags. We have developed the recommendation engine based on what your library looks like. We can send you additional content, and obviously the real-time reading statistics. And then, as I said, we make that available through our API to third-party developers to let them access that data and build applications on top of that, because we're a small team, huge amounts of data, we can't do it all ourselves. And that has spurred an ecosystem of third-party developers who are now using that data and using that information to build additional applications, such as an Android app, a sync to a Kindle device, a tool that would allow you to analyze or use your analysis from services like 23andMe and compare that to research results and tell you whether you're potentially you have a potential risk to get Alzheimer's disease and so forth. And so, because of that, we had this huge user love. People were really following us. We had a massive vision, and I'm pretty proud to say that even though we just developed the kind of reference management software, people were saying quotes like, Mendeley is the bomb for academic gangsters looking to blow it up all raw-like, or I love Mendeley, it brings the fun back to science, Mendeley, greatest lifesaver ever. So I think, as a conclusion from that product perspective, I think it's very, very important that you do something that you really, really like. Something that comes from what you've been doing maybe in the past, something where you feel you have a passion for. I think that is the most important thing. Do something that you really like, because it's a journey that usually will last 5 to 10 years. So, I mean, we were quite lucky. We got a pretty quick exit, and I'll give you some information about that. But I think it's very important to have the long-term perspective and do something that you would really like to do for many, many years, and where you have a deep and very strong passion for, because this is going to be a very, very dangerous and also challenging journey. Which then gets us to the second point. If you have this deep passion for this product, you have to have a great product. Without a great product, all marketing, all PR, everything has no substance in my view. So make sure that you have a great product. In our case, I think we pretty much nailed the product market fit, as you can see by the user testimonials. And at some point, we actually collected the application letters from the advisors and put that were like 60 pages of testimonials, why people so dearly wanted to be a Mendeley advisor, and put that into the pitches that we made to the investors. And obviously, in that case, we had also massive vision about changing science, making science more open. But you need to have a product that actually proves that you can do that vision. And then I think we have particularly struggled initially with PR, let's say professional PR, getting coverage in the top outlets. But what we eventually figured out is, you start from a grassroots approach. You have a great product, you collect user feedback, and you engage with those guys individually. And if you really hit a problem, people will start to talk about you. And what then happens is the journalists become aware of what you're actually doing. And based on that, you can then piggyback with, let's say, a little bit more professional PR. PR won't solve itself. It's impossible, in my view, to just simply hire a PR agency and hope for the best. You have to do it yourself. PR agencies can certainly help at a certain stage, but early on, you have to do it yourself. I think we in our experience, I mean, we had contracted 2 or 3 PR agencies pretty early on. And I won't blame the PR agencies, but for us it was too early, and I think we were too hands-off with PR agencies. So eventually Victor, my co-founder, who is also a great, let's say, strategic thinker behind that visionary project that we did, he then managed those journalist relationships, and he still does. And I think that was the key to success. So let me talk about kind of the founders, then how we got to the investors, and then the exit. So that's us, 3 German founders. We knew each other from university, but we, as I said, we did not have any previous experience. And then we sailed over, so to say, to the UK. And that was mainly triggered by one guy who's also in the audience today, Stefan Glenzer, who is now also a partner at Passion Capital. And he is a German guy, and he told us, well, you know, I've built several businesses in Germany, and I've built one business, namely Last.fm, or helped to build one business in the UK. And I can tell you it's a real difference. At least 5 years ago, when we were thinking about potentially moving to Berlin, it did certainly make a difference. Today, probably those cities have kind of closed the gap between each other, but I would still think for us, addressing the English-speaking academic market, it was crucial. But we only really became aware of that because we spoke to Stefan. And so we moved over to the UK, specifically for 3 reasons. We wanted to get access to the English-speaking academic market, and there, admittedly, the US is the most dominant market. In our case, we didn't have any relationships in the US. The whole visa situation was a bit tricky, so we settled for the UK as kind of the middle ground. And also the UK punches heavily above their weight in terms of academic weight, so to say. The top universities, Oxford, Cambridge, UCL, they're also all in the UK. We also thought about access to resources, and that's about the talent and the money. So in the UK, you can obviously hire good talent from all over Europe. We had at some point even hired a guy over from Silicon Valley who joined us in the UK. And then also the let's say, network of investors is pretty strong in London. I will speak to that in a second. And lastly, it's about, you know, events like this, sharing experiences, talking to other entrepreneurs, getting first-hand insight into how other people did it. So this is a photo of us, Stefan, and then the 3 founders, 3 of us, when we did the first handshake deal with Stefan as the early seed founder, so to say. And so one thing I will come back to all the time is, I think for us, and for me personally, it was always about building lasting relationships. So, you know, the community is small. What you want to do is going to take you probably 10 years. So it's all about building lasting relationships and being honest about that. You know, you will always meet twice, and so that's, I think, what has really worked out in our case, also with regards to the exit, that this idea of building lasting relationships really pays out in the end. So in addition to Stefan, we then also managed to get the Skype founding engineers, Ambient Sound Investments, on board, who we felt were really helpful initially about with helping building a kind of distributed technological system. So we had like all the client desktop installations connected to a central server, and those guys certainly had shown it before with Skype. And then lastly, we added one other guy to the team of investors who was the former head of digital strategy, Alejandro Zubillaga, and he was crucial in doing all the deals on behalf of Warner with YouTube and iTunes. And we wanted to get him on board because he had these insights from a copyright perspective, copyright owner perspective with digital companies. And we were in a very similar situation. We were a startup, and we were handling massive amounts of copyright protective content that we would handle on our platform. And Alex kind of really provided that insight into how copyright owners would think about and how they would be afraid of these potential disruptors. And he was also a very strong advocate about, okay, whilst you need to be dangerous to those guys, it's also about building relationships. It's reaching out to them and be proactive and try to figure out how you can be helpful, try to figure out who is the key decision maker on the other side. In addition to that, also at some point, since we are so heavily focused on academia, we also explored grant money, meaning money from government, money from the EU. And I would say in our case we were very, very successful with that. We started with a small grant that was kind of published by the EU, but where the national agencies would pay technology strategy board in the UK. So I remember myself writing this first report, first grant application, and it was a huge pain in the ass, but in the end it delivered 250,000 euros additional funding for no equity. So you basically submit this application and tell them what you want to do, and that is then over 2 years they give you that money, and you obviously have to demonstrate that you make that progress. And in our case it was about fostering collaboration between SME and an academic institution. I would say it's very important not to think about that money as let's say critical. You cannot build your business on grant money. It's a nice to have. It's a huge amount of time that needs to go into that, but it is certainly worthwhile to explore, because in certain cases there are some easy resources that you can tap into, and if you want to have more information about a couple of these examples, then come to me afterwards. We also, I think, over the course of Mendeley, I think we've probably spoken to every VC in this world. And I would say probably every VC in this world has turned us down, with the exception of those guys that I mentioned here. And that was because people said, well, there are 5 million scientists, each of those guys maybe pays $5 per month for your service in a freemium business, so really how big can your business be? I think we've proven that the business can be big in terms of usage. I think we haven't had a chance to prove it from a monetization perspective. We had and still have very nicely growing revenues, but kind of the acquisition came in between. But I think what I want to say is it was not kind of a from 0 to 100, you know, all success story. As I said, like at some point we toured the US and tried to pitch the US investors with, in my view right now, what I believe is a massive, complete overvaluation, and our expectations were far beyond what anybody would grant us. But fine, you make this experience. And I think particularly as a UK-based business or startup, it was very tricky for the US investors to pour a lot of money into a UK-based startup. So something you have to take into account if you want to pitch US investors, you know, those guys ideally want to be close to you, and it might be, maybe a bit too much to ask them, you know, for huge amounts of money if they can't be close to you. So much about the investor story. Why did we eventually get to that exit? So as I said, from very, very early on, we kind of established relationships with all the big guys in this space, mainly to get to know those people, to understand how they think, what are their problems, what specifically are they afraid of, but also to tell them about the value, to tell them why we believe we need to be in this market, and why we believe we do the right thing compared to what they do. And one of the examples that we frequently made when we spoke to those guys was that, you know, in the academic space you have a lot of content that is being put out by the publishers. On top of that, you have a small layer of, let's say, metadata that is being created by, let's say, third-party providers, and sometimes by the publishers themselves, that would, for example, link academic papers via semantic links. So they would try to identify, let's say, items or keywords automatically via data mining and machine learning in those papers, and then connect those papers automatically based on that. But one view in that space was completely missing, and that is the social layer. But we would not enable that social layer. That social layer is already there. In academia, it's there. You have collaborations, you have people working with each other, you have professors teaching students, but there's no infrastructure that would be able to capture that social layer, and that is, I think, our unique value proposition that we had in that market. Now, what happens then if further down in the future that social layer actually becomes the driving force of content discovery, of new research discoveries, of collaborations? So what if we don't take care of that social layer right now, but it becomes something very, very important further down in the future? And you can already see in other industries that this is the case. So if you look at Facebook, if you look at Twitter, Pinterest, they are all kind of ways of social aggregation that actually right now demonstrate and dominate how people are interacting with content. And I think that is one of the massive value points that we provided to that industry, which kind of was the hook for starting these or continuing those conversations with those players, and eventually it led to the acquisition of Mendeley by Elsevier, one of the biggest, or actually the biggest academic publisher. Now, I think that was probably the least expected thing for us, because Elsevier has a pretty bad reputation in that space. I mean, those guys are living on a business model that kind of squeezes the university budgets, takes research. I mean, the criticism that has been voiced is, you know, as a publisher, you take those research papers, you have them reviewed for free by researchers in that community, and then you sell it back to the institutions at a high price and profit margins of 35%. But you know, in our case, I think we also had the view of saying, well, if you want to change the system, you can try to change the system from the outside, or you can try to change it from within. And I think now we're doing that from the within. And what we learned, because we had these relationships, is that probably 2 years before the acquisition, there was a new team who joined Elsevier. So we knew who were the key decision makers. We got to know the new managing director of that division that bought Mendeley. And it started basically by saying, hey, you know, actually, I believe, that was at that time, the managing director said, he had a product view, he joined that organization, and he said, I believe you're doing something really valuable, so let's figure out what we can do together. Then, however, you get into the discussion, well, you have always bilateral contracts, right? And it's very difficult to have deep product and technology integration if it's just governed by contract. So eventually we came to the point and said, well, does it make sense to, you know, have you thought about being acquired? And we obviously no way we've thought about that. But in the end, it was a very good deal for every, let's say, for every stakeholder. So one of the things that particularly in my case was important to consider is you as a startup founder, you have several stakeholders. You have yourself as the founder, but there are employees and there are investors as well, and there's the broader public. And you need to then think about, okay, what is the best outcome that you can achieve when you continue the company versus when you exit the company. And I think whilst we would have had the guts and, let's say, the energy to continue, there was probably in our life, there were probably two windows of opportunity. One was pre-revenue, when we were still strong and pitching with our vision and product traction, or maybe 5 years down the road, if we were able to prove that this business would really be able to deliver a lot of, let's say, profit. I'm convinced of both, but I think at that point in time, we decided to say, okay, it's this window of opportunity. You only get this window of opportunity just once. We don't know whether the second window of opportunity will really open, when it will open. And then you have little things in there, such as liquidation preference, that if you look at it very specifically, in very details, and you do your calculation, also tell you, well, the exit further down, just from a purely mathematical perspective, needs to be so much bigger to actually be better than the exit right now at a potentially lower valuation, that, you know, from every perspective, be it the employees who would take money off the table based on their option package, be it the investors who would make a nice return, could have been potentially bigger, but right now it's a nice return in a very short amount of time. And obviously for founders, it's a life-changing event, right? I mean, I'm not sure if I would exit my next business that quickly, if I believed as much in that as I believed in Mendeley. But for us, obviously, as founders, it's a life-changing event. So coming again back to that building lasting relationships and being in it for the long run, there's a very nice statistic and graph that shows how long does it take to build a technology empire. And that's basically an analysis that looks at how long did the top 100 publicly listed software companies in the US, how long did they take to get to certain amounts of revenue. And you can see that on average, it takes a software company 9 years to get to 50 million in revenue. So all the hockey stick calculations that show 50 or 100 million revenues within the first 5 years is probably kind of the red piece here, and everybody of us wants to be in there, and it's nice to tell that to investors, but you for yourself as a founder have to understand what you do has ideally a long-term view and a long-term impact. And I will in the end conclude my talk by what you do and everything you do in every kinds of decision, be it in your discussions with employees, investors, partners, has a long-term impact. So this is for you, it's a long-term decision. It's a long-term lifestyle that you have to decide for. So what made us then, throughout the founders, the investors, and the exit, what made us successful? I think the core of Mendeley has always been a very strong founder team and the fact that we've always stuck together. One advice I can really give you, it will become hot between us founders, and some of you have already built companies, and so I guess you've probably already seen that. But I think you have to have this absolute trust between you as founders. Again, it's a long-term thing. Even if you disagree with each other and you want to decide and part ways, then you have to do it in a clean way. I think in our case, everybody, be it the investors, be it the acquiring company, be it the partners we had, were always very, very impressed by how well the founding team worked together. And whilst we had our internal struggles, I think towards the outside world, we always clearly had demonstrated that we, as the founding team, we're going to make this happen. So you have to stick together, because if you, as the nucleus of the team, don't make it work, the whole thing will break away. And we have seen already in the previous presentation that teams breaking up is probably one of the biggest reasons for companies not being successful. The second piece of advice is investors, they are great if you engage with them. They want to help usually, but there's no way that they usually become proactive on their own, and that is okay because they have 5, 10, 15 portfolio companies. So you need to seek the discussion. You need to update them regularly in order to get the most out of that. We at a certain point of time had a board meeting every month, and that was frankly, that was then too much. We decided to scale that down to one board meeting every 2 weeks and every 2 months, and also reduce the amount of work that would go into that. And we struggled, I think, initially a little bit with how to get the most out of these board meetings, and that is, I think, something where your investors should help you. So we, in particular, struggled with, updating the investors with how our performance was over the last, let's say, 2 months versus, hey, what are actually our strategic questions? And I think we did not do a good enough job quickly enough about actually pulling knowledge out of our investors. Rather, we kept it more on, okay, let's try to keep the investors happy with a good enough status update, rather than actually being open and saying, well, these are the questions that we really have and where we don't know an answer to. I think in addition to the investors, there are a couple of crucial partners in that ecosystem that you should seek for advice. In my personal case, it was our law firm. So we worked very closely with Oric in that case, and there's one guy I cannot recommend highly enough, Giles Hawkins, who over the last 5 years kind of helped basically build Mendeley and also was one of the critical pieces in making the exit happen. So, seek those individual people, 2, 3, 4 of these individual people, and build that lasting relationship. Be open with them about your problems, and if they understand you, if they understand your situation, they will help you to get there. And that is, again, build relationships that last. Note, there's nothing about exit here. So we did not strategically plan any exit. I think it's about building the relationships, and that means that over time you will become aware of opportunities that might lead to an exit, might lead to a partnership. But it's all about these relationships. So to maybe summarize a couple of additional mistakes and learnings. I've tried to keep it high level, but I can go into a bit more detail if you have further questions. One of the biggest mistakes we did, and the company is suffering until today from that mistake, is that we hired 2 junior people from the early days on. Especially since we are so heavily focused on technology, we hired, unfortunately, 2 junior people with too little experience in building big, as you can see, distributed system that will be able to handle millions of people and millions of documents and terabytes of data. Whilst those guys are all motivated and they all want to make it happen, and frankly, it's impossible for them because they don't have the experience. So, and I have to say, unfortunately, the company is still suffering from that. So we have managed to introduce a couple of more experienced people, but I cannot say strongly enough, because it's so painful to see things not work, that we hired, unfortunately, 2 junior. And the second piece is, we listened too much to our investors. And what I mean by that is we took that advice, let's say, for too granted, in the sense of, okay, everything that those guys say has to be true. So it's not wrong to listen to your investors, but it's wrong to, in an unreflected way, just go after it. There were two specific examples I would like to mention. Is one where we, I think, kind of listened to and we paid the bill for it, and the other one where we kind of resisted. The easier one where we resisted is we were kind of frequently challenged with the question, well, let's build a Facebook app because all the students are on Facebook and we want to engage them. But the problem that we had with that, we couldn't figure out a way to actually get immediate value from a Facebook app. It would add to all the things that we would already be doing, and which is the last point here. We already tried to do far too much. So eventually we decided against doing a Facebook app and try to keep focused, which was also one of the problems that we had because we weren't too focused at all. And the other piece of, let's say, decision that we took, and here I say the board because eventually we as founders, we also supported that decision, is at some point we opened an office in the US. And I'm not sure whether for a digital startup it's really necessary to have many different and distributed offices. In our case, it certainly wasn't. With the history for us, we said, okay, we're going to raise a significant round internally with the existing investors and use that money to go over to the US because that's our most important market, to open the office in the US. I went there, so my job was, after I've built kind of some sort of stable infrastructure in London, to move over to the US. I spent 2 years in the US, and I personally had a great time, but for the company, I would say it was not the right decision. And the reason for that is because it completely disrupted how processes went in London, and we did not think, let's say, well enough about how to support the ongoing organization in London in the absence of one of the founders. And I would think that probably cost us €1 million, maybe even more, just to take that decision to go out into the US. And then lastly, we just simply tried to do too much. But I think that's probably a problem of everybody. But I just can't say it again. Probably many investors will tell you that. Try to do less. Just try it. And some of the learnings, I think, out of the whole thing of doing this startup, the most difficult part is how do you handle your emotions? And then when it comes back again to your founders. If you have a strong founding team, I always say shared joy is double the joy, and shared sorrows are just half the pain, and just half the sorrows. It's about how do you manage your emotions and how do you manage these ups and downs, and what is your strategy of handling that. So some people just overkill themselves by doing too much work. Some other people have how do you call it, this breakdown. So how do you handle that? The good thing is we, amongst the founding team, always had the agreement that this is a long-term journey, so we didn't expect to exit at that point in time. So we said, okay, we need to have a lifestyle decision here. So we usually left the office at 7, 7:30, 8 after the first year of hard work. But since we said, well, that's a lifestyle decision, we looked for travels on the weekend, go to the gym, meet with friends. So it's a lifestyle. It's not kind of you work 3 years to get somewhere. No, being a founder is a journey and it's a lifestyle decision. And that then leads us to the second point: find people to enjoy the ride with, and that's usually your co-founders. And I want to conclude with, in my view, this entrepreneurship thing is a lifestyle decision, and it's a long-term thing, and it's long-lasting relationships with some selected people, and that is how I think about Mendeley, and that has brought us that success. So my question is then, how can I help you? I'm happy to answer any questions, share more insights, some of the other details that we experienced throughout the journey. Thank you.